I'm Misha da Vinci. This is the Grift Podcast, conversations to get you ready for the future. My goal with this podcast is to give you brain-expanding, life-changing content that prepares you for the new world. For this episode, I've pulled some of the most deeply interesting, provocative and inspiring clips that you may have missed from previous episodes this season. The clips include Gen Z's willingness to trust in technology more than themselves, the dark side of big tech dominance, workplace surveillance of your brain, smart cities and the growth of sensors in public spaces, the role of technology in shaping human relationships, education and healthcare in the era of immersive tech, the transformative power of large language models, and how to embrace the future and succeed. The source episode for each clip is included in the description for easy access. This is the order of the clips. Futurist Tracey follows, entrepreneur Kemp, privacy expert Daniel Solove, neurotech expert Nita Farahany, political scientist Wendy Wong, tech policy expert Amba, tech journalist John Lawrence, political demographer Jennifer Sciubba, tech visionary Alvin Graylin, tech thought leader John Nosta, and non-obvious thinker Rohit Bhargava. It's a juicy, provocative episode that you will love. So let's dive in and get ready for the future.
I did some research a few years ago, and it was about the future of media. It was a future of media report I was doing, and I was talking to some fashion students, and the one, she was 20, 21 years old to me, and she was saying, I really need some AI to tell me what fashion suits me. I mean, this was a fashion student, and it transpired that actually what she thought was that even though she had a fairly good grasp of what her style was, she actually needed to ask an objective machine, actually objectively, what the analysis was of her style. And I said to her, well, that's very interesting. Do you really need AI or some kind of assistant service, or do you just need a friend? Because there's all of this human data, this intuition, this gut feel, I would say, is also a data point, which is not being utilized, and actually even more so is being lost. And I think this is a big problem. But what I found from researching with those when they were Gen Z at the time, is that they were happy to be regulated. There's one guy who said to me, I really would like a fridge to sort of lock its doors and stop me from eating when I've had too many calories that day. And so there is this this outsourcing of trust and self-discipline and self-regulation to a sort of technocratic, I don't know what it is really, a technocratic realm that is external. And I think that does actually scare me, because I don't know where that goes then. Once you've lost trust in yourself, then anything can happen, right?
We do have this antipathy towards these big conglomerates, right? Big pharma, big oil, big auto. We have this sort of feeling like, these are bad. But you say very clearly, and you go in depth in the book about why big tech is so much worse. Conglomerates and monopolistic behavior is bad, right, in general. And then with big tech, it's a whole other level. Can you drill down on that a little bit?
Yeah, so I think in these companies are in some of the most significant digital markets, and a lot of commerce flows through them. So they're kind of the gatekeeper, the choke point. And as the economy evolves into one that increasingly uses AI is powered by compute power and data, and they actually control both as well. So they also are in the driver's seat as it relates to the next kind of wave of technology that's happening. And the problem is that when you have companies that eventually get too big to fail, they also get too big to care, that things start happening as it relates to our civil rights, as it relates to, in this particular case, the collection of our information, but it also stifles innovation. And let me give some concrete examples. Like you look at Amazon with e-commerce, or Apple or Google with their mobile operating systems. they own the marketplaces, but they also compete in the marketplaces. So if you're a mobile app provider that charges for ebooks, for example, you have to pay Google or Apple 30% if the consumer buys from the mobile app. But if Google or Apple offers that ebook, they don't have to pay that platform tax. Similarly, everything throws through Amazon's marketplace, and they can see what products are selling, and then they can come out with their own knockoffs, but they don't have to pay the same price or tax to Amazon because they are Amazon as well. And so what happens is that you see significant impact to small and medium businesses, other technology providers. We've seen this with the news and journalism, that the information flows through the large tech platforms, and this defunds journalism that has a significant impact on our democracy. So it's not just about the commerce and specific markets. It has ripple effects to things that impact our democracy, such as journalism. When you have these companies just being so big, some of the issues that are associated with them, such as privacy and cybersecurity, get exacerbated because they're not being pushed to be more friendly to consumers in this area as well. I mean, Meta was hacked 5 different times in 2019. I mean, the data was stolen, but there isn't an alternative to what they offer. So they don't have to fundamentally change their practices. People have been talking about the bad stuff that's been happening on Instagram for years, but it just keeps on repeating itself.
Even at the turn of the century, we had massive data gathering already. Some companies were already doing that and collecting and selling people's information. We had credit reporting, which is a massive amount of information that was used to determine people's credit worthiness for loans, or do background checks for employment. But the internet, and what sparked me to write the book, was that really was going to take that and accelerate these trends. And so the digital dossier is a collection of all sorts of data about people that is then used and analyzed to make decisions about people. It could be just a simple decision like, should I, what ad should I see? Or it could be a more complicated and influential decision on someone's life. It could be, whether or not they get a loan, or whether or not they get a job, or a variety of other very important life decisions that this information could be used for. And these digital dossiers are this collection of data. I called the book The Digital Person because, in essence, we are reconstituted as a digital person of data. And this person is both fact and fiction. In fact, a lot of the data does say a lot about me, but it's also fiction. I'm not just a collection of bits and bytes and data. You can't capture a whole person just by the data. So we have this kind of weird fusion of decisions that are both invasive and getting too much into aspects of people's lives that they don't really want to share, in combination with certain shortcomings and failing to know the whole story and failing to understand the context, or getting things wrong as well.
So give us, what are the logistics of this dossier? Like how is it? How does this work on the back end? I am on my computer, I go to different sites, I'm shopping, I'm putting in my information because I have to register for this company or this institution or this governmental agency, yay, I did that, it's so quick, oh my gosh. Oh, it's just gonna come to me, boom, I have an email, everything's done. So I'm having this like maybe really cool experience, like, because it's so easy, but give us the logistics of what's really happening on the back end.
Well, on the back end, what you do is being tracked. Data is being collected with every click, with everything that you do. Data can be gathered. And gathering a piece of data, in one instance, can be often innocuous. Okay, so I bought, Diet Coke, or I bought this particular book, or I visited this particular website. Occasionally some of those could be, invasive, but a lot of times, a lot of the information seems relatively innocuous, just your day-to-day information. But if you aggregate it, what I call the aggregation effect, aggregating it together starts to paint a portrait of someone, that a lot of data about people, even just really mundane data about their lives, this can then be gathered, compiled, aggregated, and then analyzed, and computers can make inferences about the data. And these inferences can reveal certain things about people that they don't want to reveal. And it's startling, the inferences that can be made. And so there's a very famous case where Target wanted to market to people who were pregnant, and they wanted to do it early on in the pregnancy before they started buying baby products. And so they gathered data about their shopping habits and were able to figure out who was pregnant, and then start sending baby product ads to them. And what they found out through their algorithm analyzed, crunched all the data, and what it came out with was that people who bought cotton balls and unscented products had a very high correlation to those who later, started buying baby products. So, and it was actually a pretty good prediction that it was able to make. So, it's really every little thing, like small things that we don't think are, going to reveal something about ourselves, could very well reveal that in the situation. And this is what's happening on the back end. People don't realize, okay, when you do something as simple as, buy, cotton balls or buy certain products, that suddenly, companies are going to figure out things about your health that is, that can be very startling to people, and upsetting to people who, didn't want to share that information with the company. Nothing is really safe. And it's scary because, your information at the hospital, information your doctor has about your health, your financial information anywhere, nothing is safe.
I want to talk about workplace surveillance, where I think this kind of brain monitoring and this sort of tracking of our brain data, companies are going to think, oh, this is a great way to improve productivity, and there'll be a million reasons. Tell us what you learned about workplace surveillance.
I mean, workplace surveillance has, just reached epic proportions already, whether that is by tracking people through cameras on factory floors, to, Amazon's armbands where it tracks its employees as they move from place to place, to even in white collar workers, especially post COVID pandemic, where more than 80% of companies report to installing what's pejoratively been called bossware onto people's computers, where they track keystrokes, or they track, the amount of time people spend sending emails, or on different productivity software, or even the amount of time that they're on social media. Even more creepily, sometimes turning on webcams when people are working from home to, take pictures of them at their desk. So that's the environment and the backdrop in which brain wearables are entering the workforce. And what I found was that already for more than a decade, that there are companies like SmartCap out of Australia that have sold technology into companies that enable them to track the brain activity of their employees, in that case for the limited use case of trying to track their fatigue levels. And so if you imagine a commercial driver or somebody who's in mining or pilots, there's lots of software that's been designed to try to track their fatigue levels to begin with, but this is kind of going right to the source, putting a headband or something embedded into their hard hat or other, kind of caps to track their brain activity. And maybe that's an okay use case, and that if it's just fatigue levels that you're monitoring, and it's just people who are in these kind of commercial driving situations, hard to argue that their mental privacy is stronger than society's interest in not having them fall asleep at the wheel. But that same technology, when it's not just capturing fatigue levels, but instead what's called raw brainwave data. So to track one piece of information from the brain, you're recording everything that's going on in the brain at once. And then that, you know, as AI gets increasingly more sophisticated, it's being mined for much more. And so I was surprised and disappointed to see that already companies were starting to market the same kind of technology, you know, earbuds or headphones to track attention levels at work and mind wandering in the workplace, to try to track people's productivity, to say like, well, some people pay attention for long periods of time. Some people pay attention for short periods of time. Figure out which of your employees are paying attention and which of them are, you know, kind of spending their days mind wandering or not, and they're distracted. And that's a disturbing trend. And you add to that trend a lot of workplace wellness programs, seemingly benign, right? Except that they're not governed by any of the same privacy regulations for health data. And they're increasingly being used to try to focus on mental health, all while collecting a huge amount of personal data from people's brains, which could then be used to make discriminatory choices about them. And so, you know, what I found is that there's this creepy trend that is coming toward much broader surveillance of people's literal brains at work. And it's happening, right? It's not just technology that is being sold. Across China, workers are having their brain activity monitored, not just for fatigue levels, but if they're paying attention or their mind is wandering. When I was presenting this information at the World Economic Forum in Davos, a global CEO came up to me afterwards to tell me that they had already trialed on thousands of their employees across Asia, tracking brain activity. And they weren't just looking at attention and mind wandering. They were looking at boredom and engagement and productivity at home versus at work, and trying to use that information to make managerial level decisions about people based on what their brains revealed. So this is a trend that is coming, and there are virtually no regulations that really address the collection of this kind of information, again, against that backdrop of like massive surveillance is happening in the workplace. Add to it this last piece, and it just feels like you really are in the panopticon at work.
Have technology will use. I mean, that's what happens in big companies, right? They're like, okay, we can add this, we can use this, let's just do it. And so what's the solution? That is just, it's so, when invasion of privacy, this wholesale invasion of our privacy and our dignity, what can a person do? This is what they're facing at work.
I mean, unfortunately, the answer isn't really like, I mean, in the beginning, it could be quit and go elsewhere, right? Except once everyone is doing it, where are you going to go? And a lot of the times when this kind of surveillance technology is unveiled, it's on people who don't have as much upward mobility to begin with. And so it's normalized on people who already are threatened with respect to being able to exercise the same rights as other people. And, you know, so quitting, I don't think is the answer. I think the answer has to be something more societal wide. And I think that means recognizing a right that people have to mental privacy, to be able to keep their brain activity data to themselves when they're at work.
What is data literacy and why is it important? And then I want us to talk about some of the solutions at a global level and at an individual level.
So data literacy is about data competence. So think about literacy we have in terms of linguistic literacy. You can read and you can write, and therefore you can reason through words and through language. That is what literacy, as we think about through language, is about. So we also think about numeric literacy. You can do math, and you can think about how math applies to your store transactions, for example. So having data literacy means being competent in data. It means understanding that data are created, that you have a role in, when it comes to human data, you have a part in that creation of the data, and to recognize that. And it is also to recognize the limits of data and what you can't do everything with data. I think there's a tendency to think, well, we'll just, because of AI systems, we'll just let AI do some tasks that you really don't need an AI to do. And so what I think data literacy is a set of concepts for individuals to have, you and I, but also for communities to have. This is what literacy only means something in the collective, right? Because if you're personally literate and nobody else is, really can't talk to anybody else, can't be competent. So that's what I mean. And I think that's part of the solution. It's not the whole solution. We talked about all the other solutions that I didn't get a chance to develop in the book, but I think they're important. And I think data literacy is really important as a right, because if you just think of data literacy is, it's nice to be data literate. That's not going to get us anywhere. I think everyone should have an entitlement to that kind of conceptual framework. And just the last thing I'll say is data literacy is not data scientist. We don't have to be data experts. That's what a data scientist is. We need to be data competent. So literacy is a much lower bar in terms of understanding, and it's also the most basic that'll help us, even if we can't write the algorithms to mine the data, we can certainly understand why it's important to do that or to not do that.
We're moving down this sort of path of more data, more technology, exponential change. What can listeners do? Just simple things that they can do.
So one thing that people really need to do, and I know, words really matter, I think. And it's really important to start thinking about yourself not as a data subject, which makes you subjected to the practices of data collectors, but to think of yourself actually as an important part of the equation, as stakeholders. We have a role as stakeholders in data because you're the data source, and without you, there's no data, right?
Right.
So I think it's really important to think about ourselves as critical actors in this data process. We have not been asked for our opinions or to be part of the process today, but we should be. And I think that's a real change in thinking that I'd love people to take on.
Should we be like unionizing, gathering together as sources of data and saying, no, we have rights, you can't do that?
I have a very measured response to that, which is I think it's a good idea. But a lot of the models out there for these what are called data intermediaries, right, are usually about financial exchange. Let's get together and sell the data we have together to get a better price. And I discourage that kind of thinking. So if it is about data unionization, if it is about creating a common identity around certain types of data, that is getting us closer to the full idea of humanity, which is we're not just financial actors, right? We're social beings, we're cultural beings and political beings. And so data unions, if they work like a labor union, would be much more appropriate in a human rights context than something like a data trust, which is a financial model.
There was 27 billion of funding that went to AI companies last year in 2023. 2/3 of it came from Amazon, Google, and Microsoft. And so you ask yourself, what do Amazon, Google, and Microsoft have in common? Oh, they're actually the dominant cloud companies, right? And that's not a coincidence. It is because the way we're envisioning this technological paradigm at this point has everything to do with who already controls the infrastructural resources you need to in order to scale this technology. So cloud is a big piece of it. Yeah. There's also, labor and the skills and expertise of who can use this infrastructure most efficiently. We know that compute is a scarce resource, and so a lot of the emphasis, whether you're OpenAI or you're just some, your Mistral, they're all kind of really focused right now on trying to make the most efficient compute be as compute efficient as they can be. So, make the most bang for their buck. And that takes a very particular kind of engineering prowess. And that too, those brightest talents, where are they going? They're going to where not just they get the highest salaries, but where the hub and the most exciting and the largest scale AI research is happening. Where is that happening? That's happening in either in big tech firms or firms that are bankrolled by big tech firms like OpenAI. And so, I think that line got removed from the article we wrote. But one of the things, the image that really sticks with me is that the OpenAI Microsoft kind of, whole Sam Altman debacle that happened over Thanksgiving, what it in many ways showed was that all roads in the end do lead to Microsoft for OpenAI. And I think similarly for a lot of, so-called startups that are trying to enter into this generative AI, large language model ecosystem, they find that all roads must eventually lead to those that can give them the infrastructure for cheap or for free, and kind of provide them that stability of access. And then the other big piece of this, so there's labor, there's compute, there's also data.
I'm going to read something directly from the article. It's indeed, many startups simply license and rebrand AI models created and sold by these tech giants or their partner startups. This is because large tech firms have accrued significant advantages over the past decade. Thanks to platform dominance and the self-reinforcing properties of the surveillance business model, they own and control the ingredients necessary to develop and deploy large-scale AI. They also shape the incentive structures for the field of research and development in AI, defining the technology's present and future. So the real story is who controls the infrastructure, who controls the data, who really is controlling AI. That's really what's happening. Because everything else is an obfuscation of like, oh, we should debate this. Or is AI going to do this? Let's just look at who owns it, who controls it, and what's their agenda.
Yeah, let's start there, because I think that, who gets to define what is an existential risk is also a question right now. It's like, actually, the thing that I think is an existential risk is the fact that we have concentrated power in a handful of companies. And that is that's an existential risk for long term. It is a risk for democracy, for national security. Like, do we want to stop for a second and have a kind of public conversation about whether this is the direction we want to go, because we haven't had it.
What is a smart city? Break it down for us.
So the first thing I'll say is that academics like planners and geographers and people in urban tech argue about what this phrase means. And like they've been arguing about it for 10 years. So I'm not going to get into the academic argument. For the purposes of the book, what I was looking at are the types of technologies that fall under the heading of smart city technology. They're primarily, but not exclusively, digital technologies. And they kind of work to knit the city together in different ways using digital technology. And they can be used in infrastructure, bridges, and highway systems and traffic management. They can be used in surveillance. They have all sorts of applications. But the sort of the differentiating feature is that we have technologies now that have AI and machine learning capabilities. We have very sophisticated surveillance, facial recognition. We have big data and the ability to gather a lot of data, not just statistics, but I'm talking about cell phone signals and a lot of very granular data, a lot of which tends to sort of accumulate in cities because that's where all the people are. So smart cities is this very broad kind of family of technologies that sort of uses those elements.
You talk about sensors. What is a sensor and how does it impact a human being walking in the city or utilizing a city, living in a city? Where are these sensors?
So there's sensors everywhere. So the best example that I could tell you is when you tap your phone to pay for something, there's a sensor in there. Or when you go to the supermarket and you have an RFID reader and it sort of reads the barcode on your cereal. There are lots and lots of different types of sensors. Some of them are expensive and complicated, and some of them are very basic. But essentially what they're doing is they're counting something or taking account of something. They're air quality sensors, for example, which are able to sort of detect smog levels or particulate matter. And then they take that reading and they translate it into a digital signal, which is sent to something, right? So, or there are sensors that can determine the amount of traffic passing over a particular point on a street. It might be something that's embedded in the pavement, or it might be something that's some sort of sensor that's trained on the street, counts the number of vehicles, sends it to the traffic control center. So there are lots and lots of examples like that, and they come in all sorts of shapes and sizes. But essentially, it's taking a reading of something, turning it into a digital signal, sending it somewhere where it can be processed.
Right. So I'm curious. Quietly, sensors are being embedded at various points and various places in cities that we are not aware of.
Right.
Where would these sensors be? So you said traffic is one. Like what kinds of sensors? Like, can you tell us a little bit more about that? Because we don't know. All of this is sort of happening quietly behind the scenes, and people don't know what's going on. They don't know that every time I pass this intersection, such and such is going to happen. Okay, so we know that there are cameras, we know that there's CCTV happening. We know some of these things are happening because they're talked about. But you're saying there are all kinds of sensors everywhere.
Yeah, it's hundreds of millions of sensors are deployed around the world. They exist in the service of all sorts of different things that aren't connected to one another. So municipalities may use sensors track whether there's like leaking in a sewer main. Shopping mall owners might have sensors to detect the amount of traffic that's going through, or using some kind of cell phone monitors to sort of push advertising at people. It's a very diverse set of objects and they do different things. And some of those things are quite benign or useful. Like you don't want to have a leak. If you have a major water main, you're in Los Angeles, so you're very familiar with water scarcity issues. So you want to have, it makes good sense to have sensors in water mains that can detect drop off in water flow because there's a crack in the pipe somewhere. That's a useful thing.
Yeah.
Whether sensors detecting whether there are the number of people in a park, for example, I think that's more problematic. And we had this big conversation in Toronto about Sidewalk Labs, which was the Google subsidiary, the smart city subsidiary that tried to set up in Toronto. And one of its premises was that it was going to build out this bit of brownfield on the lakeshore, and it was going to fully equip it with sensors and all sorts of sensors. And to your point, you don't really know what exactly they're reading. And we can come back to what people should know, the questions people should ask, but they are very ubiquitous.
Biologically, more boys are born than girls. This is just a fact. That's just out of the womb without anybody doing anything. And then there's this massive preference in so many countries for boys over girls. And we've seen like such skews in the population. In those countries where there's a huge gap, so where the sex ratio at birth is like for every 100 women, there are like 120 men, there are going to be a ton of men who could not, for the life of them, within their society or nation, find a wife. And that's because of demographic engineering or parental preferences and literally aborting the female fetus. What are your thoughts on that? Because to me, when I look at it, I'm like, holy crap, that's a big problem.
It's a big number. And, there's so much to it. The answer is we do not know, because for all that we think, we've not really seen this before. And there are some, researchers who are friends of mine who've tried to look at other points in history where this has kind of been the case, but putting it in our modern context, we've not seen it before. So the simple answer is we don't know. I think where I get hung up on it is I know it's incredibly important and we should draw attention to it, because also it is an example of demographic engineering kind of gone wrong in some cases. But when we're looking for what are the societal implications in political science, you're looking for, how does this affect peace? How does it affect prosperity? And the answer is it may not affect either of those things. It may just purely be at the societal level, which is still of interest to lots of folks.
So political scientist, political demographer, that's exactly right. From my perspective, I really am about human potential. A lot of men out there are going to be miserable. And what are we going to do about it?
Yeah. Yes.
There are already these apps that are being created for relationships. So probably they'll end up having a relationship with an app, having a relationship with some AI. I'm not kidding you.
Yes.
That's literally what's
going
to happen.
Yeah. And it's whether you live in a country with a skewed sex ratio at birth or not, you're starting to see some of that. And I think that's really, to kind of bring it back full circle to thinking about what has changed. Is it just the cost of children? Is it just that women are more educated now? No, there's something else that's changed in society that does pressure birth rates lower. It does pressure marriage rates lower. And we do have this atomization. For all that we are connected, we have such an atomization of us in society that there's just less of this community aspect. And I think it really matters. So, hey, tech sector, come on in and let's think about how to have real in-person relationships. Well, that's a tough one for tech. If tech is, I don't know, how do you have these analog relationships?
One of the interesting things that I'm seeing is that virtual reality is going to become more and more of a thing. And that's good and that's bad. It's good because now we can have really amazing connections with people from all around the world you never would have before. It also means you can walk in the shoes, experience the life of someone you would never, ever know. You can experience things you would never possibly have experienced in the physical. The question is, will this technology interfere with organic human relationships? Let's say it connects you with someone living in Shanghai, and you've formed this incredible bond in virtual reality with this person. It's like, oh my goodness, this is amazing. I really love this person. But now you have to do the job of physically connecting with them, because then you will not make a baby in virtual reality.
Exactly. That's a good one. I mean, this is also a great argument that there need to be more social scientists in Silicon
Yes.
Valley. But because, yeah, it's really about, some people are going to use it
Mhm.
great. And we've seen this with video games. There's great
Yeah.
research like, oh, this can
Yeah.
be so wonderful. But how do you kind of plan for those who are
Who
not
become
going to?
addicted to technology and substitute it for a lived organic human experience? What should people prepare for? The individual listening to this conversation, what should they be preparing for in response to changes in population? And then what's one thing that they can do that's specific after they hear this that they should do, or you would guide them to do?
So much of the future is baked into the present when it comes from demography. So, what I can prepare for, I'll tell you what I think about. What will the rest of your life look like? Are you investing in your health right now so that you can have that longer working life that you may be potentially forced into, depending on where you live? Are you thinking about your keeping your skills up? I wrote about this in a newsletter too, that a fascinating study out of the OECD that part of it was, what rules do employers have that maybe prevent people from working when they're older? But the other part was, what are older workers not doing that could keep them in the workforce? And even starting at my age, actually, it was right around my age, it was a real unwillingness to upskill and reskill. It's kind of like, man, I feel like I just got out of college. I'm in my 40s. I don't really want to have to learn something else again. Like, shouldn't I be able to ride that a little longer? And the answer was no. So, I think about how can I continue to maybe even invest more money in myself, as a commodity there. I think it is at the company level that we're going to see our greatest innovations and preparedness for an aging society, how to be resilient. So, you know, what are individual companies doing to think about, Walmart has been making headlines lately when they're kind of getting rid of college degree requirements to hire folks. That's actually an adaptation to population aging as well. And so, I think looking at your own company and thinking about how you can tweak that is great. That's the place to be.
Tell us about the positive value of these technologies.
The good news is actually I've been thinking about this for over 30 something years.
Mhm.
When I first studied VR, my research paper was, how do we take immersive technologies and disrupt education?
Mm.
Right. And the more I look at this, and over the last, unfortunately, the conclusion of my paper was, in the next 10 years, everybody will be using this. It's going to be amazing. Our education system is going to be totally disrupted. I was a few decades off, right? So, but I talked to educators all over the world, and I'm seeing that they are now being open to this message. I'm seeing, not just about 3-4 weeks ago, I was in Qatar at the WISE conference. It's the largest education conference in the world,
Yeah.
and they are bringing educators to talk about how technology should be implemented, and people are trying to write papers about how do we change the pedagogy, how do we get people off of these old systems. And now with AI together with immersive tech, we actually have kind of a two-prong attack where you allow full brain learning with immersive tech, which, as we all know, you remember like 10% of what you see, like 20% of what you hear, whatever, 50% of what you do, and then you learn more when you actually start teaching, right? So when you do these things, immersive tech allows you to use all of those senses. And you have something else that we didn't have before, which is you are now soon able to have a personalized teacher tutor
Yeah.
that is with you 24/7.
Yeah.
The classes, like these classes I have right
Yeah.
here, they actually have built-in AI, and they have a camera, they have microphones. Now, if I want to enable them, this one doesn't right now, but if I want to enable a future version to have an always listening mode, and it can actually hear all my conversations and be able to guide me and be that patient unbiased teacher, that tutor that sits on my shoulder.
Yeah.
And there's been studies already over multiple decades
Yeah.
that shows that one-to-one tutoring is multiple orders of magnitude, actually probably I would say it's a standard deviation, 2 standard deviations plus,
Mm.
in terms of improving quality of learning
Mm.
when you have one-to-one versus a large class,
Wow.
right?
Yeah.
And this is one-to-one,
Yeah.
but then it's one-to-one from a all-knowing teacher
Yeah.
that knows everything about history and math and science and all the things that no single human can actually do
Yeah.
today. We are now making that available to anybody can afford $100 piece of hardware.
Yeah.
I think that's where it's going to be super amazing in terms of elevating the quality of knowledge of humans in general.
These new technologies are going to be absolutely vital in health medicine and research.
Yes.
But talk about that a little.
This is actually one of the areas where there's very little debate, is that having both AI and XR being applied to various areas of healthcare, and particularly I think in the mental health side with immersive tech, where I was talking to the folks at the VA Veterans Association, and they have hundreds of thousands of veterans that come back and they have post-traumatic stress, or they have just issues in terms of suicidal thoughts and so forth. And when they put them into these devices, and then they have these AI coaches that help train them and communicate with them, and then brings them back into the different scenarios that they were in, so they can gradually move out of it in a way that is desensitizing them. So I think there's a lot of value there, right? I mean, the first use of AI was actually Eliza, or one of the first uses, which was a AI psychologist, right? So
Therapy
it's
chatbot,
kind of
yeah.
going. It's quite ironically or appropriate that we're starting to use it again for mental health, for using immersive tech for relaxation and stress relief, using it for pain relief, distraction therapy, using it for when people have they lose their limbs and they need to be able to reconnect or readjust their nervous system to be able to get rid of paralyzation or get rid of chronic pain.
Phantom pain,
There's so many things that are proven to actually work, right? And for surgery, one of the examples I had in the book was one of the actually the preeminent surgeon for conjoined twins, and he only does head conjoined twins. So your brains are conjoined. How do you separate it? You have to first do these scans, very detailed scans, in using CAT scans or other type of technologies, and then you put it into a 3D model and you plan out the surgery ahead of time. And a lot of times he's doing it across national borders, so that if you didn't have this technology, there's just no way to get these things done. So it's just amazing to see the types of use cases that are being used for healthcare. And I think we're going to find even more going forward. And you talked earlier about the BCI and Neuralink and so forth. I think for those quadriplegic types, this type of technology will be a godsend to allow them to communicate that they before were completely locked in.
Large language models have introduced a fundamentally transformative new concept into this. It's the inner dialogue. It's my ability to interact with large language models to have an engaging conversation. Here's the interesting thing. It's no longer a search query in the old days of Google, right? It is an iterative dialogue. So my iterative dialogue that I have with my friend LLM in the morning with my coffee conjures and fosters this new type of not inner monologue, but inner dialogue. I think that's fundamentally transformative. You can look at that in the context of a dress rehearsal for life, something as mundane as that. You can look at it in the context of just sort of organizing your thoughts, or you could even look at this iterative process in a deep introspective and contemplative perspective. So I think we haven't even got out of my first cup of coffee yet, but these are the things that are kind of going around in my head. So to me, that's really interesting. And that's one of the fundamental aspects about the large language model systems, is that it engages you in a way that is as modern as hell, but as old as life itself. And the analogy I'm drawing here is that engagement, that back and forth iteration that I find so powerful is a Socratic engagement, Socratic dialogue, right? And that's what we're getting now. So our ability to create that dynamic, it's a cognitive engagement. Ultimate human engagement is cognitive. It's Maslow. We're moving beyond just, do I feel happy? Happy is an overrated articulation of human engagement. I think, yes, I can be happy, but am I engaged? And we look at Abe Maslow's hierarchy of the self,
needs.
that's where we're going. That's where we're going. It's technology is pushing us not into a functional perspective, but into a self-realized perspective.
And you're saying that self-realization is coming via deeper cognitive understanding, awareness, interaction, engagement. So it's a cognitive process rather than an emotional one, rather than a spiritual one. I mean, how are you?
Yeah, I think you
looking
can
at
push
this?
in that direction. I think you can argue that many people who have deep intellectual engagements find an aspect of spirituality intrinsic to that. You know, I think that's absolutely the case. But I do believe, and I call it the productivity triad. There's actually data on this. And when we look at the use of large language models in the context of, let's say, the workforce, right? We see two things that emerge, and that's all that anyone talks about. Number one is speed. I can get it done faster. Okay?
Yeah.
Right? And then number two is they can get it done better. So in other words, I have the speed to, let's say, to write 500 words. And because I'm using this profound corpus of information that transcends my individual knowledge base,
My range, yeah.
And I connect through this neural web that finds things that not only do I not know, that I would not even have thought about. But there's an element here, and I'm sitting down. Let's go back to the cup of coffee. What did I talk about? I'm having coffee with Socrates. Right? I am actually having this iterative dialogue that is stimulating, that is provoking, that is enlightening my cognitive capacity such that I'm having a really good time. And that's the third part of the productivity triad. It's not just speed. It's not just the quality. It's not just productivity in its sense. It's that I, as an engaged participant in this process, whether it be functional like work, or academic, or even me just sitting at my desk, gives me a sense of engagement, creative engagement, that I feel empowered and I feel in a way actualized in the context of Maslow's hierarchy. And I think that's going to be a very, very interesting manifestation of AI.
There are reasons to be positive and optimistic about the future that aren't based on blind hope, that are based on actual reality, based on things that are happening right now. And I also hope that for the next generation of entrepreneurs, and when I say that, I don't just mean young people, because, there are 50, 60, 70-year-olds who could start companies, but, they're the next generation because they just started their first company. But what I hope is that next generation of entrepreneurs sees the potential to innovate something that can actually positively impact the world, and that there's a market for that.
As a dad, what do you tell your kids about the future, about how they should prepare for it, how they should think about it? I mean, they've grown up with you and this is the work that you do. So what have you passed on to them about the future and how it will impact them and how they can impact it?
I think what I've taught them is to not be afraid of new directions and new innovations that are happening, and to try them. And when you're willing to try them, and when you're willing to be the first to try them, you become more invaluable no matter what you're doing. If you're working for someone else, or whether you're an entrepreneur trying to do your own thing, because you're not resisting the future.
See that again? When you're willing to be the first to try it, you become more valuable. Talk about that. That's so good.
Yeah, because you're not resisting the future. You are embracing what's going to happen next, and you will guaranteed be either working in a place where there are people who resist the future, and you'll be working for someone, or you'll be working in a world where whoever's able to embrace that first will have an advantage.
Make sure to listen, follow, and subscribe for new episodes wherever you get your podcasts and on our YouTube channel.